You're listening to MuniCast, the podcast that discusses municipal leadership. Season 5 of MuniCast is brought to you by SaskTel's Innovation and Collaboration Team. SaskTel can help you sort through the noise to create solutions that add value quickly, whether it's reducing your environmental footprint, driving investment, community development, or just saving money. Contact your SaskTel account manager to find out more. MuniCast is hosted by Suma, the voice of Saskatchewan's hometowns. I'm Stephanie, Suma's Education and Events Coordinator, and in Season 5 of MuniCast, we are discussing how truth and reconciliation relates to municipalities. On this episode, I'm joined by Kevin Harris, Account Executive with the Indigenous Business Development Team with SaskTel. Kevin is a settler in the Treaty 4 area where he and his family live, learn, and work, and has been employed with SaskTel for the past 42 years. Much of that time, he was an account executive with the financial services sector, and for the last 8 years as an account executive with the Indigenous Business Development Team. Kevin is familiar with many of the challenges we face in understanding the impact of technology on business models and communities. He has worked with various businesses, developing strategies and assisting them to realize the benefits of utilizing information and communication technologies to enhance business practices. Kevin's journey into understanding truth and reconciliation began about 24 years ago when, as a family, they became foster parents. Kevin and Lori Lee are very proud parents of 2 Indigenous children who are now adults and are active in connecting and celebrating them with their culture, ceremonies, and communities. The work that Kevin does with the Indigenous communities and the personal life they lead are interconnected and intersect regularly. Kevin values the relationships he has with Indigenous leaders, knowledge keepers, and is on a constant journey to continue learning how to be a good ally for Indigenous views and practices. Hey, welcome, Kevin. Thank you very much for joining me today for this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I look forward to further conversation in this regard.
Perfect. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada has outlined 94 calls to action, with a portion of those calls being directed towards government, some to all levels of government, including municipalities. In earlier episodes of this podcast, we have discussed the legal requirements for municipalities and why education is a crucial component of reconciliation that municipalities can be partaking in. SaskTel has also been working towards ways to engage with Indigenous communities. What are some of the ways that SaskTel participates in Indigenous engagement?
That's a good question. For the area that I'm working in is our Indigenous Business Development Team, and I joined them about 8 years ago. And our vision in that group was, to collaborate with Indigenous communities and looking for ways to leverage the whole information and communications and technology environment to enhance social health, economic prosperity, and those types of activities to help the nations and facilitate a lot of what the nations are already trying to do. For us, the TRC call to actions number 57 and 92 really kind of govern a lot of how we operate within our Indigenous Business Development Team. And there's a couple of things, that we look at. There's 2 primary drivers that kind of set the course for how we look to collaborating with Indigenous communities. And one of them is what we call digital equity. And my best recollection of where that phrase was coined comes from the First Nation Technology Council out of British Columbia. They do some amazing work. And they coined the phrase digital equity. And it's really about, when you look at that, it's really about a state where every Indigenous person and community is fully equipped to access and effectively use technology, right? To thrive, to be successful in business. And it's not just the internet. It's really about how do we work better and collaborate with Indigenous communities to change the direction or impact how technology is used and viewed within Canada when it comes to the whole idea of economic reconciliation. The other challenge, or the other thing that drives us forward, is this idea of data sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty. And there's a strong movement in that regard, and that's really looking at how Indigenous data is being used. In the past, information about Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples was used, but not by the community, but by other entities, government, businesses, and so forth. And it was really quite destructive when you look at the whole idea of colonialism and how all that data was used. And often that data is fractured and is incomplete and is up everywhere else but within the hands of the Indigenous communities. And so we are, again, from our perspective, trying to find ways that we can help with that idea of Indigenous data sovereignty. Everything that we do, the services that we're building, especially our cloud-based services, are ensuring that Indigenous data sovereignty remains intact and remains part of the Indigenous community. So those are some of the things that we're involved in to try and better understand and respond appropriately to those TRC actions.
It sounds like you have a lot going on, and I think you've touched on this already a little bit, but you talked about your Connected Community program and how it supports First Nation digital transformation and connectivity. Do you have any examples of some success stories with that?
Yeah, and so going back to this whole idea of digital equity, it really came about understanding that there is an inequity within Canada, certainly within our province, was when COVID hit, and it really heightened the urgency to accelerate the need to provide better connectivity for people to work from home or for students to work, be able to do school from their home environment. Because what happened when COVID hit and individuals had to stay home, it really showed that first mile, which is that connectivity from the home into the internet, was lacking, was terrible, just missing in many of our Indigenous communities. And when all of that stuff was shifted online, and that whole disparity, that digital inequity, became very important. And so one of the things that we worked on to try and we collaborated with a number of communities in this was to address that connectivity in the fastest way possible, to address the inequity and the lack of connectivity in many of our homes within Saskatchewan. And so the Connected Community did a number of things. One of them was to find ways to partner with other other internet service providers, ISPs, to leverage what they do and what they do better, and what we do, which is really about infrastructure. We did some programs years ago where, working with the federal government, we provided fiber-based technologies to all the schools, all of the health clinics, and all the band offices right across the province. So we had a good base to start from. But what was missing, again, as I said, was that connectivity to home. So a Connected Community was to work with the community, work with other ISPs to address that connectivity, lack of connectivity. And so we developed that. And so what happens is we have a few partners that we give them access to our tower structures, our fiber-based technologies. They provide the connectivity and the services to the homes. So we could do it a lot faster. It provided a lot of the necessary connectivity to start with. Some of our success stories that our first nation was Musqueam First Nation. They were the first nation in our partnership program to provide broadband internet to all the homes in their community. Papikas was another one that came right after that. The other piece to this that's really important, and again, it goes back to that whole digital inequity, is with our partners, they look for hiring local people. So they want to hire people in the community and train them to install the equipment, maintain it, and also providing them long-term jobs. And so that was another big piece of our program, was to, wherever possible, whenever the need or whenever the interest interest was there is that we would find ways to employ local people to keep them engaged, and we can learn from them as well. And that's been quite successful in many instances. The other thing that came out of that program, which is really exciting, was the development of an Indigenous-owned ISP. So Beaver River Broadband became a reality, and that's a partnership between Middle Lake Tribal Council and Wood River Internet. They formed Beaver River, and so now most of the Indigenous communities that we are building capacity in are being done through Beaver River Broadband. And again, they'll hire wherever possible and wherever the interest is, local people to install, and they train them and they give them employment. And it's really successful in many ways. And so we've got Minnesota First Nation is now fully connected, as I understand, Eagles Lake, and there's multiple other ones that are in the works of being developed. So it's really cool to see that take place. Another story that's really is quite exciting was with Whitecap Dakota Nation, just south of Saskatchewan. They are our only fiber-based First Nation community. So because of their proximity to Saskatchewan, the ability to provide fiber to all the homes was economically viable for the most part. And so that was one of our first, and is our first and only at this point in time, fiber-based Indigenous community. They can all the same services that you can get in Saskatchewan or Regina or any of the major centers. They have that capability now through that infrastructure that was funded by the entities of, I think, provincial government, federal government, and then some other funding that was available to them to do that. So, and then on top of that, I mean, that's connectivity to the homes. But once that infrastructure is in place, we did a pilot also with Whitecap on using IoT, Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything technologies to provide Whitecap with information around water meters. They have a bunch of commercial entities out there in Whitecap, and so they're monitoring the water usage. So now they can be more accurate in how they bill, more accurate in understanding how much water is being used by the entities. And it's a starting point of using that technology to provide better information so that they can be more efficient in a lot of what they do as well. So the Connected Community does all those types of things. It's really about what's the primary initiative by the nation, and how do we leverage information communication technology to enhance that business practice that they're trying to achieve. So those are a few of our success stories.
Across the province, SaskTel is engaged with many different municipal organizations who seek to innovate. Contact your SaskTel account manager to learn more about some of these initiatives and how they can help your municipality today. It sounds like a very broad range that you have happening there. I was just wondering about some of your northern municipalities. You had mentioned that a lot of the First Nations you've been working with. Did you find that northern municipalities had some of the same connectivity issues, or did they have a larger infrastructure as you were kind of working on these?
Yeah, they have the exact same need, and they're more challenging in some ways because some of the backhaul technologies just doesn't exist as it needs to. And so I know that there's a number of initiatives underway within SaskTel, trying to get federal funding to provide better broadband so that we can backhaul to broadband so that we can provide some of that connectivity. We've seen some of that in some of those nations where we brought some fiber there. We had the backhaul that was necessary, upgrading some of in some of the far north, we're still using microwave technology, but again, building up that capacity to enhance that so that it can be readily available when we get to that point. Always needing to have it funding from the federal government primarily to bring that forward, because that's one of the big gaps. All of this takes money. Right. And without that influx of capital, it makes it tough to get to that point. And That's where the nations are, applying on. There's a bunch of different programs that the federal governments have offered, but getting money from them is not all that simple and easy at times. And so that is probably the biggest thing we need to do, is find ways to fund this infrastructure build for sure. And then even once the infrastructure is built, I mean, the other challenge, most of the federal government programs are all capital intensive. So they'll if they fund it, they'll fund the capital, but there's always the ongoing monthly costs of the service being provided and supported and maintained, and those aren't funded. And so it's a challenge there to find ways for the nation to be able to afford that type of continual ongoing revenue stream that they need to provide that funding.
That makes a lot of sense. That's something that I've heard a lot, is that funding is one of the major issues, especially when it comes to the far north. Is there any other issues that you would identify as some of the main causes for concern when trying to expand internet services to the far north?
The funding is one thing, but then again, it's just available technology that's there for the backhaul back in. Because some of those nations are sparse in the sense that they're spread out. But as we start seeing some of the communities building infrastructure, homes, housing closer together, it begins to make it easier to provide that level of connectivity. But always it comes back to ensuring that we have the backhaul network, the broadband network to support whatever activity that is there. So that's the biggest thing is again, it's the funding to do that, and then the capability of getting it out there for sure.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, and I'm going to ask a little bit more about how SaskTel supports Indigenous-focused organizations and events through sponsorship. I noticed that SaskTel does sponsor the Indigenous Youth Awards of Excellence, as well as the Saskatoon Tribal Council Health Fest. Can you tell me a little bit more about why it's important for SaskTel to sponsor events and initiatives like these?
This is the SaskTel Indigenous Youth Awards has been going on actually for over 25 years. And it's a really cool program, and I've been involved a little bit in the back room behind some of that. I've been able to attend a few of the sessions of the events prior to COVID. That's important because we know leadership comes from our youth, and if we're going to address any of this digital inequity, and part of that is the contribution of Indigenous leaders, Indigenous people to provide direction and help shape some of where this technology is going. And so youth are key to that. And SaskTel's always been very involved in supporting and promoting youth in technology. And the Indigenous Youth Awards has been a great big push for us because we see the value in investing in youth, because they are the leaders. They're leaders today, and they're definitely the leaders of the future. And so being part of that just is SaskTel's small way of saying we support you, and we want to be there for them to continue their education and continue in providing input and leadership to the communities that they're from, but also into whatever business they go to, whatever direction they go to. Having that ability to fund some of that and provide them that encouragement has been a big part of that. And we sponsor various other activities like powwows and those types of things, which are really important for the community, and those are fun for us to be part of as well. And that's a big push for us as well to be involved in those communities and participate where we can.
That's wonderful. SaskTel has taken a lot of steps towards truth and reconciliation and addressing some of those calls to action. What are some resources or methods that you've been using that guide your Indigenous engagement? And are there ways that you think municipalities could use some of these same approaches?
Well, I think it started off again 25 years ago when we developed our first Indigenous team that was focused on the Indigenous communities. When I came involved, like I said, 8 years ago, a lot of the groundwork had been done, and it started off with those leaders. And the two that really influenced me was Colleen Cameron, who actually, unfortunately, just retired from SaskTel this past summer, and O'Neill Gladue, who passed away 2 years ago. were very key in establishing and listening. And so they spent a lot of time in listening to the communities, participating in conversation with leadership to understand and to build those relationships that were meaningful. And so we're very fortunate that we had so many individuals from SaskTel that were Indigenous that led us that way. And it was really about listening. It's about engagement with them, to listen to what their needs were, but more importantly, what are their dreams, and what do they envision, and where would they recommend us that we go. So a lot of what we've done has been based upon input from a variety of different Indigenous leaders that have said these are the things that we need to do from a SaskTel point of view in order to be better allies for change within Saskatchewan, and being more purposeful in engagement with our Indigenous communities. And so it's really started off with that, and it's something we try to continue on, because it's about a journey. It's a long life journey, and it's about listening. Our Indigenous leadership, they have so much wisdom to share with us, and it's really about listening, engagement early on, to have them share things that are important to them, and that can shape some of our policies and procedures as we move forward.
I really liked how you highlighted listening there. That's something that we've heard in our previous conversations in this season of the podcast as well. And it's something that I've heard in other areas where we need to listen and hear the truth before we can truly move towards reconciliations. And hopefully that's something that municipalities are able to start doing as well, if they're not already. I wanted to thank you very much, Kevin, for taking the time to speak with me today. This has been a really interesting conversation. Do you have any final comments that you would like to share with our audience before I let you go?
You're municipalities are in exciting spots. And if you engage with, this is my personal viewpoint, if you engage with the leadership of the Indigenous, First Nation, or Métis communities that are within your region, and you go humbly and ask for their advice or their insight or their wisdom, they will share. There is so much wealth of information, ways of knowing and ways of thinking that our Indigenous leadership have that we would benefit by. And so that would be my last comment, would be it's exciting. Our Indigenous communities are leading in many ways this province and this country. And we benefit as a community, as a society, when we spend time listening to our Indigenous leadership and give them the grace to listen and to adhere to some of the thoughts and ideas that they might have.
This brings us to the end of another episode of MuniCast. Stay tuned for episode 4 of season 5, airing this December.